Okay, I did turn on the recording.
Sounds good.
So we have that. Kyla, just let me know when you want me to start up.
All right. We do have, let's see, looks like 5 folks now that have said they're attending live. Give them a couple more minutes to jump in here.
Okay.
And for those that are viewing this recording later on, please be sure to indicate that in the January 2019 meeting workbook, as well as on the availability tab, as well as in the check-in, check-out tab. Please make sure to log your time so that we can account for the hours that you are spending with us, either live or virtually. So we do appreciate you joining us here. We'll be right back.
Nope.
So in the meantime, Mickey, do you have any updates from the state HSEM side of the house?
So from DHSCM, we are continuing to just support local jurisdictions. Right now, we are switching over from an ESF focus to critical lifelines. So we will be reorganizing the state EOC based on those, and all our report outs will be focused on the lifelines that are out there. So you'll see that change kind of from us, but it was a busy winter with a propane transportation emergency declared, and a lot of work with private partners. So we have our business EOC up and running, and then Wednesday we just finished a full-scale exercise. Every quarter we exercise. So we had about 40 of our ESF folks in here filling all of those roles and learning how they now fit into critical lifelines instead of just ESF 1 or 2. So we'll be learning lots of new stuff this year, I think.
Oh, that's awesome. Any pending deployments? Anything on the horizon for the team?
There aren't any requests in for deployments at this point. We do have, I have a meeting today with the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology, Social Media Working Group. Colorado is going to, the state of Colorado, pilot some digital products for them, hopefully. That's what we're talking about today. So we will, they'll be taking most of their work products that they've created, and they're making them interactive. And then we would be hosting those on our website along with them, and then they'll spread across the US from there. So we'll see where that goes.
Awesome. And for those of you that have not checked out the DHS Science and Technology Virtual Social Media Working Group. They have a lot of great resources, both for disseminating information as well as monitoring as well. So lots of great content out there, actually including some of our partners and the Cascadia VOST, Alicia there and her team in the Pacific Northwest. So shout out to all those folks that are attending live or viewing the recording later on. Thanks so much for joining us. Mickey, let's go ahead and kick it off.
Okay. Welcome back to all of our COVOST members. We still stand around 60 members, and over between Thanksgiving and January, I have about 5 new members in the works. So good news for our team is growing. And we just thank you again for your support. Hope that these Friday web-based trainings once a month are valuable and also meeting your schedules. And we will continue to provide the recorded versions for you throughout the year. So I'm going to turn it over to Kyle. He is your training coordinator for the team and has lots of good stuff in the works for you. Okay,
oh, thanks,
Kyle.
Mickey. And hello, everyone. Kyle Nelson coming to you live from a beautiful snowy morning up here in Aspen. Looking forward to a great powder day right after I finish up with everyone here. Looking ahead to some of the training for 2019, we have a great presentation this morning. We'll get to that in just a minute, but kind of looking at things as we move forward through 2019, we're going to try to go for quality over quantity with our trainings. We're going to be condensing those down to 1 per quarter. So what we're going to do is January, April, July, and October, since we'll typically skip the holidays, so November and December, and just to condense that so that it's more efficient for your time as well, just to make sure that we're giving you the value that you all deserve. And of course, if there's any training needs or requests, those will be, I'll do my best to honor those alongside with Mickey. And of course, if needs dictate, we can always add more sessions in as well. So please feel free to stay engaged in the training channel on Slack, in our COVOST team Slack there. So let us know what you're thinking of, what your desires are. But that's what we're going to be doing moving forward. I'll be updating that Google Calendar invite. But that's all I have as far as the team updates, the training updates from my side of the house. Anything more from you, Mickey?
No, that sounds great. Are we ready to hop over to Aimee?
Yeah, let's do it. So folks, we're really, really excited today to have Aimee here with us this morning. She's coming to us on behalf of the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, where she works as a behavioral health and inclusion work lead. So I'll let her tell you a little bit about herself, what that means, and some of her great experience she has. And she'll be sharing with us today on understanding stress and behavioral health principles for crisis communicators. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. And so I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy. Aimee.
Hi, everyone. Really pleased to be joining you here from CDPHE. I'll try to avoid those acronyms moving forward, but as Kyle said, I'm from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment's Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response. And as I navigate over to the presentation, just give me one moment. The reason I'm here with you today is to talk a little bit about understanding stress as it impacts crisis communicators. Kyle and Mickey approached me about this, and it is also a topic near and dear to my heart, because when I was first hired at CDPHE, I was basically wearing 2 hats. I was wearing the behavioral health hat in our office, but I was also addressing I was basically acting as a communication liaison, a public information officer with my office. And what I really realized is that in disasters, communication is one of those frontline behavioral health interventions that can really help people manage and take care of their stress if it's done well. And yet at the same time, communication is also a vector for stress. There's been lots of research in the past 20 years and longer about how the amount of TV we consume, and now in this day and age, social media we consume, contributes to the level of stress that we experience in disasters, sometimes even more than our proximity to the actual hazard and event and our own personal felt impact by it. A study that I cite quite a bit in work that I do is that following September 11th, you were better able to predict people's post-traumatic stress symptoms, so not the full-blown post-traumatic stress disorder, but we're able to predict the symptoms of post-traumatic stress better by the number of hours you spent watching coverage of the September 11th news media than if you were in New York that day. So people across the country really felt that. And so a dynamic thing that I want to get into with you as VOST, supporting the crisis communication and monitoring the crisis communication that happens in hazard events, is how do you take care of yourself when you have to stay in that? So hopefully that gives you a little bit of sense of where I'm going. I'll introduce myself a little bit more along the way, but I also wanted to give everybody a chance, since we're a sort of small group in person today, to introduce yourself and to say something about above and beyond your name and your VOST affiliation, what questions or experiences you have related to today's topic, so that I can make sure I'm tailoring this to the interests of the group and maybe providing some follow-up resources or things like that if it turns out that the presentation I prepared today doesn't quite get to what you're interested in. So I just want to take a moment to let folks very quickly introduce themselves again with your name, your VOST affiliation, what questions or experiences you have related to the topic, and then what's your favorite funny or good news social media handle that you know of or that you follow, because I promise that'll come back later too. So Kyle, Mickey, would either of you like to start?
I'm happy to start. So this is Mickey Trost with COVOST. And so my experiences are monitoring in the state EOC, and before that, monitoring social media for a fire department. And my favorite funny, completely funny social media handle, because there's no value in it, is the next door, like people on next door, or whatever the funny thing is, the weird things people say. So that's my funny one that I go to when I need a little break.
Nice.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Kyle Nelson here, the COVOST training coordinator. My experiences with today's topic come from my work with the Colorado Virtual Operations Support Team and doing the digital media monitoring for several years now, and also some work that I do with digital media monitoring in private industry as on the contract side. And my kind of funny or good news social media handle, I like Mickey's as well. I believe that's Best of Nextdoor. It's always a good one. So shout out, that's awesome. And I'm a meteorologist as well. So NWS Podunk is another one. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek representation of some of the funny behind the scenes stuff that happens in National Weather Service offices.
That's great. It's certainly an invitation for anybody else to introduce themselves if they would like to, and if you prefer that I go on, please give me a long silence.
Okay, I can go ahead and introduce myself, and my apologies. I'm recovering from sinus surgery, so I sound really congested. So Lee St. Dennis, I'm from the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I have a research role looking at virtual operational support teams. And I currently work as part of a wildfire team within Earth Lab at CU. And then my two funny channels that I follow would be The Onion and Bad Banana.
Great, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, hi everyone. I can go ahead. Hi, my name is Susan Mertz, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Denver in their International Disaster Psychology program. I'm actually one of the interns in Amy's office, and so I'm kind of here just to audit this and see what's up. I think one of my favorite social media things that's happened recently is the big push to make an egg like the top like thing on Instagram ahead of Kylie Jenner. So I thought that was pretty entertaining.
Nice, Susan. Glad you could join us. And when I pulled up the presentation, I think those were the folks that we had on the phone live right now. Kyle, was there anybody else that I missed?
Edwin, do you want to jump in?
Yes.
I think Edwin's just monitoring, so that's all we have for live folks on the call, Aimee.
All right. Well, again, my name's Aimee Sieberth. I've been working with Colorado's disaster behavioral health team for about 6.5 years now. And this is, again, a topic close to my heart as well, because I also had some crisis communication experiences, especially early in my career during the 2012 and 2013 wildfire seasons and the 2013 flood season as well. Since then, I've sort of become a communication backup for our office and focus more on how to apply behavioral health in a lot of different activities and different disciplines and fields, help integrate it into the work of many of our response partners. And as a part of that, I've had the opportunity to respond to disasters both here in Colorado as well as on an EMAC team to Puerto Rico right after Hurricane Maria, as well as a temporary stint with the CDC to respond to the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. So I may refer to some of those experiences as I talk about this, but I think in particular, there's a very impactful experience when you are just monitoring a disaster or interacting with it virtually. So that's what we'll try to focus on today. And you're going to get my favorite funny or good news social media a little bit later in the presentation. So here's the situation that we're dealing with. In the mid-90s, Lorianne Perlman and Karen Sock-Vitney coined the phrase vicarious traumatization, which is when the stories we hear from our clients transfer onto us in a way where we too are traumatized by the images and details, even though we did not experience them ourselves. So Perlman and Sock-Vitney are folks who really worked with the helping professions, be that therapists, be that nurses, folks who interact directly with folks. And what they found is that over time, people really started to internalize the stories that they were hearing from the people that they were working with, and that it was a cumulative process. So it wasn't just that they heard one terrible story, but that over time, they heard many stories. And I wanted to highlight this quote from Lipsky in her book, Trauma Stewardship, because it emphasizes how it changes not just how we're thinking about what happened to somebody else, but literally what it does to our sense of the world. So she said, my exposure to other people's trauma had changed me on a fundamental level. I had absorbed and accumulated trauma to the point that it had become part of me, and my view of the world had changed. So that worldview alteration is one of the key signs of vicarious traumatization in a lot of different helping professions. And now we're finding that it extends in some cases even beyond the helping profession. Another key issue about when your worldview changes is that then you start to behave as if what you believe about the world is true. And this was the second sort of body of research that really pertains to what we're talking about today, especially in terms of communication, is this idea of mean world syndrome. So Dr. George Gerbner was a communications researcher who developed this idea of cultivation theory, that our worldview is cultivated by what we see and what we experience. And above and beyond what we directly interact with in the world, the people we actually talk to, the experiences we actually walk through in our lives, what he began to find was that media, the representation of what's happening in life that people consume, especially in our day and age, for hours at a time, every day, will impact that sense of the world too, will impact what we see and what we experience and add to our worldview. And so given what we know about media bias towards conflict, towards sort of the mantra, if it bleeds, it leads, that means that the more television we watch or the more social media we consume, the more violence and negativity we're eventually exposed to, and the more anxious and fearful we become because our worldview changes to the idea that the world is mean. And as social media has become a bigger and bigger part of our media consumption, research has borne out that social media is also contributing to this mean world syndrome. And even though social media is curated in a lot of cases by anyone and everyone, it's prone to a lot of the same focus on threat and negativity because of something that is fundamentally happening in our brain. We have human biology that prepares us to pay attention to threat and negativity in our lives. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So collectively, media is contributing to what in some days feels like collective vicarious trauma. And the trick of the work of crisis communicators, as I said at the beginning, is that we have to stay in it. So let's talk a little bit about what the brain does when it's taking in information about the world. So one of the brain's first organizing principles is, am I in danger? So when the body is, using all of its senses to take in information about the world, the first place that it stops is sort of in that mid part of the brain. You can kind of see a shadow of it in the picture in front of you, but just think about it just a little bit above your ears, about midway back in your head, is sort of the many structures in our brain we call the limbic system. And within that limbic system is a way station that we call the thalamus. And basically at that point, the brain is answering from all of the information that it's taking in about the world through the senses, answering one critical question to organize that information. And the question is, am I in danger? If everything's hunky-dory, then the information that we're taking in right now goes to be organized with the rest of our memories and experiences in other parts of the brain. So we're integrating the present with our past and what we might project about the future. But if the brain says, yes, I just noticed something that might be a danger to us, then that part of the brain takes over sort of control of our energy, our mental attention, and marshals all of it to just focus on that threat that's been presented in front of us. So the parts of our brain at the very front of the forehead, the sort of red part in this image, start to quiet, because those are the parts of the brain where we plan, where we organize. It's where a lot of our language centers are. But each of those things take time. And so for the sake of being able to survive, for the sake of being able to react quickly, the brain kind of quiets that part of itself and focuses on what the limbic system can do to activate the adrenaline flow down to all of our big muscle groups in our body. It basically prepares our body and our brain to take action, but on a very reactive sort of way, rather than a sort of conscious planning and focusing sort of way. And when we feel that adrenaline dump in our body, the heart racing, our lungs taking in more oxygen, we're basically creating a lot of the sensations that we call stress or fear. Now, a lot of us have been coached to not pay attention to our feelings, to our sensations, to just sort of lock it down. But really, stress and fear are purposeful. That is information our body is giving us non-verbally that says there is something we need to pay attention to here. And it's supposed to help you, I'm going to reiterate, survive a threat by what our team fondly calls the 5X. So we have 5 stress or fear reactions that we're prone to, and there's a little image on this slide for each of them. Sometimes our fear reaction is to friend. It's one of our first instincts that if I don't have to go through this by myself, I'm going to pull other people in with me, and there's strength in numbers, or there's just a sense of I want to take care of somebody else who's going through something. We have this very strong pro-social response during threats. But sometimes either there's not enough time or there's nobody around us to help us out. Then we go to a pair of reactions that you've probably heard of before. Our brain coaches us to survive a threat by fight or flight. And fight and flight are sometimes the sort of literal either throwing a punch or running away. But it is also just a sort of mentality about the threat that your brain is telling you. So if you go into a fight response, it's because your brain believes that you can make that threat go away by approaching it and trying to, get big, so to speak, or address it with resources that you have. Believe it or not, yelling at someone is a fight response. If this person's making me feel uncomfortable or like they're making me confront something that I don't want to, if I yell at them, then maybe they'll go away and I don't have to deal with it anymore. That's a way to handle the threat, but it's not without its consequences, obviously. Similarly, instead of like literally running away, people in communication, a flight response might be, I'm just not going to talk about that anymore. I'm going to change the subject of what we're talking about, or I'm going to make you focus on something that's not actually what you were trying to communicate to me, because the message is somehow threatening. Those 3, friend, fight, and flight, are very active responses. They allow you to use the energy that got built up by the fear, by the stress, to do something to make the threat go away or no longer affect you. But sometimes it feels like there's literally nothing that can be done except for sort of brace for the impact. And so we want to acknowledge that there are also stress and fear reactions that are designed to help you survive, that are just about, bracing for that impact. And we call them freeze and faint. Again, sometimes this is pretty literal. You've seen, a deer freeze in the headlights of a car, even though if they kept moving, they could get out of the way, but they're just that fearful, that stuck. Or you may have heard the old sort of recommendation that if faced by a grizzly bear, you're supposed to play dead, because then there's sort of this evolutionary idea that like that's bad meat and the bear will leave me alone. Both of those are expressions of that freeze and that faint response. If you think about how you might be using these kinds of reactions when you're doing your work as VOST members, you can think about how a friend response might be sharing stories and trying to make a connection either with your fellow members or maybe with somebody that you're interacting with in that social media sphere. Your fight response can be countering rumors, like trying to make it clear that this is not a threat, and you can understand that it's not if you think about it this way. Sometimes there are probably things that come up that you're just like, leave it alone, it's not worth engaging that. A great and very tactical flight response. And you may have other examples that are going through your head. But you might also be thinking of the times where you're doing your work and you just see stuff that you can't do a lot about, but you keep seeing it and it keeps coming up. And that might be an expression of the freeze and faint response that communicators go through time and time again. And the problem with the freeze and faint response, even though they are tactical and they do sort of let you survive the moment, they don't allow you to release that energy that gets built up by the stress. And that's why in a lot of cases, stress is associated with chronic medical concerns like heart disease and that sort of stuff. And more than anything, what I want you to take away from these sort of pieces of how the brain responds to threat is that the focus of the brain on the negative is purposeful. It's because our brain wants us to pay attention to something so that either we can make it go away, we can make the harm end, or we can minimize the harm to us. Again, it's our brain trying to communicate very important information to us non-verbally. But at the same time, because all of that energy is built up, it's best to have a way to outlet that, either by making the threat go away, as in the first three responses, friend, fight, and flight, or in a different way when you've had to sort of brace, let things happen in that freeze and faint response, and then just need to let go of all of that energy you didn't use. So I want you to remember that as we keep talking about other things. So I won't spend too much time on this slide, but these are some pretty common responses to high stress or trauma. And what's interesting about this, you'll notice, is that it's not just physical responses, it's emotional, it's cognitive, it's behavioral. We express stress in our lives all across the board. And what's interesting about this list too, sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming to look at, but what I like to emphasize here is that down at the bottom, you might notice that there are sometimes positive responses to stress. You'll see caring for others. That's a great example of a positive friend response that you might have to crisis around you. But in general, all of these different symptoms are either expressions of one of those 5 F's, fight, flight, freeze, faint, or friend, or they're what happens to us when our brain's focus and energy marshaling attention takes all of that energy to a particular place in our body and neglects other parts. So, for example, I'll give a physical example and I'll give a cognitive example. People sometimes, when they're under stress, experience nausea or diarrhea. Always pleasant to talk about on a Friday morning. But the reason that happens is because stress tends to pull all of our blood, all of our energy towards our big muscle groups. so that we can literally fight or run away, use that energy in our muscles to do something. But what that means is that our GI tract, our gastrointestinal tract, doesn't always continue to work in the way that we normally have on a regular basis, and so we might experience some stomach upset, or that's why people don't necessarily sleep well sometimes. If you think about how the brain reacts and sort of keeps that energy more in the reactive limbic system, you might sort of begin to understand why some responses to high stress include a shortened attention span or problems with abstract thinking and problem solving. It's because that big frontal lobe that's, I don't know, really associated with human cognition is quieted so that we can just react and not get sort of hung up on taking too much time before deciding what we need to do to survive. So again, it's purposeful in the moment, but it's not without its consequences moving on. So if we can understand how to better anticipate and then use the energy that takes place during high stress, not only are we going to feel physically better, we're also going to help moderate these kinds of symptoms in a lot of other places in our lives too. So this is the reality of it. Sometimes you can't step away, you're in the middle of a response. Sometimes there are just too many posts. We are inundated with so much stuff all in one go. And sometimes it feels like there's not a lot that can be done about the anxiousness or the pain and the stories that we're reading. And all of that can add up. So we need strategies to counter responder stress and vicarious traumatization before, during, and after responses. So if we take what we've talked about so far, knowing what we know about the stress response, knowing what we know about how mean world syndrome kind of builds itself up, then what I invite you all to think about, I'm going to try to give you some good examples, but try to think about for yourself, what would work for you based on your response environments, what you're expected to do in terms of tasks, how long you're supposed to work. Take all of that into consideration. Take into consideration your personal strengths, triggers, resources, and then ask yourself, how can this VOST, this team that you belong to, support you? Because we deal with stress every day in our lives. During disasters or during responses that we're a part of, there might be a high concentration, but we can use the things that work for us on a regular basis, just more intentionally in those high stress events. So before we go into a response is really all about setting expectations. This means doing some both personal work as well as maybe some structured teamwork to pay attention to your baseline. Some of you may have heard of the professional quality of life screening. I'll actually show you an app that you can use that sort of tracks the ProQual, as it's called in shorthand, for you. You can answer questions on a semi-regular basis and sort of see how your quality of life level is changing over time. Something that I had the opportunity to do before and after deploying with the CDC to West Africa was that the CDC conducts pre and post response check-ins, with each of their responders, and that sort of helped both check to make sure that is this the right time for you to be responding to something before you go, as well as to see after you've come back, how has that experience affected you so far. But more than anything, setting a baseline is really about doing those, healthy behaviors that we know are good for us on a regular basis. I felt very lucky that when the EMAC request came in for a disaster mental health team in Puerto Rico, I had been trying to be somewhat intentional about some healthy behavior practices, sleeping better, drinking more water, doing some physical activity, but also, you know, spending time with my friends and family and taking care of those other emotional, cognitive, spiritual, behavioral sort of areas of my life too, because that was a tough response. And if I had not been quite as set at my foundation when it came to just good self-care, I might not have been as effective as a responder, because it would have taken even less stress to sort of push me over into some of those stress symptoms that we were talking about before. So I really recommend that people intentionally make a toolkit. We don't always know exactly what sort of situations we'll be walking into during disasters, what sort of environments we'll be working in, but if we have a menu of things that work well for us, and sort of balance that, if I know that, you know, this is what happens to me emotionally when I'm under stress, then this is an emotional tactic, activity that I can use, that I know works well for me. Talking to someone, you know, deciding to have a chance just to sort of scream into a pillow sometimes. If I take the time to both think about what I know my most likely stress symptoms are, and then to find the balance in self-care strategies, then when I'm in the thick of it, I can sort of ask myself, what of the things that I know works for me is possible right now? So you've got that options list. I cannot speak more highly about having a buddy, creating a support system, because very rarely do we catch the early signs of our own stress. It's people who know us and people who see us change, that will be able to say, hey, you might not be like burned out yet, but you're getting a little bit crispy. How can we sort of help you out at this point? And then finally, you'll see down here on this slide, there's actually a link in this final idea about setting your intentions. Kelly McGonigal is a health psychologist at Stanford who's been doing research on mindsets about stress, and how you can actually use stress purposefully, and as she says, get better at stress. I highly recommend her book that's cited there, The Upside of Stress. But among other things that she has articulated is that the research now supports that chasing meaning is better for your health than trying to avoid discomfort. So if you know why you're doing what you're doing, it's not a substitute for other forms of self-care, but it keeps you more resilient, and it keeps you more mindful about why the discomfort you might be experiencing in a stressful situation is motivated and is made meaningful by what initially brought you there. What was your motivation and intention? So before there's even the slightest whispering of a disaster, I invite you all to consider taking these 4 practices and making it a part of not only what you do personally, but what you encourage in the teams that you're a part of. So here is a few images of the Provider Resilience app. I kept this on my phone for a while, and as you can see, there's a few different screens that are part of this app, but the one that you often come to is this dashboard that includes your resilience rating. It's a combination of what you can see in the right corner, answering that professional quality of life questionnaire. You can say how long it's been since you last took a vacation. because downtime is critical to our fundamental baselines. And then there's some other just resources and tools in this app that can help you out. The I Need a Laugh piece in the middle there of the second image. My recollection is that those tend to be Dilbert comics. So again, maybe that's not quite your cup of tea, but that idea that what do I have around that can give me a laugh when I need it? What do I keep around as, you know, my mantra about why I do this? How can I think about, you know, the amount of exercise I've done? So again, the professional quality of life survey is just one tool, but it's really nice in that it gives you some feedback about where you stand in your ability to be happy and find compassion with other people. It talks about burnout, and it talks about that secondary traumatic stress that might be related to a lot of the stories that you're taking in. During a response, it's particularly important to pay attention to your energy maintenance. So like we were saying, a stress response generates these reactions: fight, flight, freeze, faint, and friend, as a way to use and marshal attention and energy to survive an event. So either there literally is a way for you to use that energy effectively. So maybe you can take a moment and use a friend response to check in with one of your peers that's on your team. Maybe as a fight response to the negativity that you're reading in the media that you're monitoring, you have ways to counter that message with the approved messages of the response that help promote people's safety, calm, connectedness, sense of being able to do something, their efficacy, or their hope through communication. I use those 5 words intentionally because those are the basic principles of psychological first aid. I said at the beginning that crisis communication is actually one of the frontline behavioral health interventions during disasters. You all can make a huge difference to the behavioral health of the people that we're communicating with in responses if you're finding ways to promote those 5 things. So just a shout out about that. That's a very effective, I can make things better by approaching this directly. Or like we said before, we might just need to leave it alone and literally stand up, walk away from the computer or whatever sort of place you're getting the media from, and take breaks, walk away. So that's usually using the energy directly, but sometimes there's literally either nothing you can do and you need to discharge that energy, or you've used up all your energy today just handling question after question or rumor after rumor, and you need to recharge your energy to go again tomorrow. So the images you see off to the right side of this slide are about how you do that quickly and effectively. We've mentioned a lot of these before, and they align a lot with how we maintain a good, healthy baseline even before a disaster. But the exercise is not just good public health messaging, you all. It's literally about the fact that we have those stress hormones, the adrenaline, the cortisol going through our bodies, and the way that we break it down and release it from our bodies is both by drinking a lot of water and using our big muscle groups to break down those hormones in our bloodstream and then let them out of our body. The other ones are about recharging effectively. So adding more sleep helps us process the information that we've taken in during the day, integrate it into long-term memory, so we're not just holding it in that working memory and going over it and over and over it again in our brains. Healthy nutrition helps us, again, avoid energy spikes. So when you see the person drinking coffee up there, that's actually about reducing the amount of caffeine we take in, because caffeine and sugar actually create artificial stress spikes. And so the more sugar and caffeine we have in our body, the more likely it is that a smaller amount of stress is either going to push us into that heightened stress reaction, or we know caffeine crashes, we know sugar crashes. We just sort of ebb and flow in and out of good mental functioning a lot faster when that's our strategy. Whereas lean proteins, fruits, veggies help us keep a more moderated energy pace that makes it less likely that we'll go into one of those artificial stress responses. So, but you may have a lot of other ideas about how you effectively discharge, let go of energy when you don't need it, or recharge when you've run completely out. This is just some interesting research from Peter Levine, who's another traumatologist. What he's found is that, again, if there's nothing else you can do, that freeze response traps the fight-flight energy in the body, and in the nervous system is in the muscles. And that's the energy that wreaks havoc on our bodies over time and in the immediate as stress or trauma reactions. So if we have a way to allow the blocked energy to be let go, we're going to get back to a good level of balance a lot faster. So what you see in the table above is signs that either you're in sort of that more stress or trauma level in the body. So when you have that rapid heartbeat, tense muscles, maybe numbness or feeling jittery, versus you're well balanced when your breath is open, relaxed, when you've got that sense of calmness, both in your heartbeat, but also just in sort of that mental, spiritual, emotional space. And I love this list. So these are signs that you're actually releasing energy in a positive way. So I sing in choirs a lot. So I love the fact that singing is a way to release stress. Yawning, burping, it's not necessarily signs of impoliteness or disrespect. That can be the body letting go of energy it doesn't need. Laughing, crying. We know that people sometimes have reactions during disasters that they don't understand, like that was such a terrible or scary experience. Why did I start laughing? That could literally be the body just letting go of some of that. So I invite you to look a little bit more at this table and consider some of the ways that you can pay attention to how your body is holding on to or releasing some of that stress energy. I'm actually going to let this run for a second. But this is a story about peer support that could actually be a good practice on a team like yours.
As an ABC cadet in 2007, I was involved in doing a trauma awareness workshop. I suppose then I knew it would be something I would face at some stage. I just didn't have the personal context then. Over the following couples, I was involved in covering some pretty traumatic events, anything from nasty car crashes to murders and the drowning of a toddler. But nothing really came close to covering the Victorian bushfires in February of this year, where several thousand people were made homeless and nearly 200 people died.
The strong winds and difficult terrain has made conditions so dangerous that no one has been allowed near this town on the ground. Even crews have been pulled from the fire front.
I was covering the bushfires from day one and spent many days on the road, confronted with some pretty difficult images and doing some pretty difficult interviews. But one of the real positives was the support I had from people at home and from people in the office. And I think it was several days after Black Saturday that I got a phone call from Lisa Miller. It was just really wonderful to speak to someone of her experience and just to know that colleagues were concerned for her. What I think is important as a peer supporter is to be constantly proactive, to be looking at the stories people are doing and wondering whether a simple phone call from me or one of the other peer supporters might actually make a difference to their day. Because I think that if the peer support program had been in place when I was going through and doing some of the stories that I've done over the years, it would have made a difference to me. And that's why, off our own bat, I guess, after the fires, I just picked up the phone and a few people just to say hi and how you going.
So what I take away from that story is that there's ways to formalize kind of that outlet of being able to talk to your peers, talk out stuff that other people might not understand. But even if it's not formal, even if it's just a friend picking up the phone and calling you and giving you a chance to just sort of let some of that go, that can be really, really powerful. And we'll circle back to that really quickly. We've only got a few slides left. But thinking about both how you can sort of take a little bit of control over that personally, but also how your team might support you that way. So I told you we'd come back to this idea of our favorite funny or good news social media handles. I am a wild fan of Lin-Manuel Miranda, who created the Hamilton musical, and is just honestly one of the most positive people ever on Twitter. He has a practice on Twitter of having a good morning tweet and a good night tweet. And actually recently that's been pulled into a book, which you see on the left side. But it's a really nice thing because he doesn't just paint everything as hunky-dory and perfect, but that everybody can use just a little bit of encouragement no matter what it is you're facing at particular times. So I'm a big fan of him. Good Black News is wonderful sort of articulation of stories from communities that often don't get featured a lot in the news for various different reasons. And then again, one of the Twitter handles that's just not necessarily about any meaty kind of content, but just something sweet and cute that I come back to all the time is this Twitter handle, Thoughts of Dog. So literally, what would this, happy, sweet golden retriever say to you every day if you could hear what they were thinking? Good quality stuff, I'm just saying. But down at the bottom, I wanted to also make you aware of a growing body of research that says that not only are we predisposed to hear other people's stories and internalize them if they're negative, but it can happen if we witness and we listen to stories of resilience too. So there's actually this growing body of research around vicarious resilience, how hearing good stories can actually change our worldview too. So what does that tell us about, again, intentionally seeking out the counters to both media and our brain's predisposition to pay attention to conflict and threat? It says that this can be part of what keeps us resilient over time, is if we can find that balance. So just really quickly, what about when it's over? This is a place where you can certainly avail yourselves of professional supports. I actually go to, as a member of the state of Colorado's government structure, I can use the employee assistance program to just, talk to somebody in that employee support program on a semi-regular basis. Even if I haven't done a deployment or experienced something intense recently, just having that outlet, I don't know, I hope someday that we have professional care counselors or primary care counselors in the same way that we have primary care physicians. But it's just sort of assumed in one of the ways that we keep ourselves well. But among other things that it's been shown to sort of support vicarious trauma or preventing vicarious trauma after intense experiences is getting involved in activities that are empowering. If we've had a tough time doing anything about some of the stuff that we've encountered during responses, then find other outlets to feel like you're making a difference, to volunteer, to reconnect with your values and your intentionality that you set before the disaster happened. Reconnection in general to people, to those positive media stories, to gratitude is a counter to, again, the focus on negativity that our brains and our media might predispose us to. Find a way to tell your story, and maybe find a way to recheck in about how things have changed since you started a response. On the pictures on the right are actually different forms of memorials that I've been a part of in different disaster events, some of them personal, some of them community-based. The Lions Strong mural that now is hung on, I believe, their library. It might be another community center or municipal center. But that was designed by folks in the community to commemorate what happened during the 2013 floods. And that's a symbol of their resilience and a way that they helped to make meaning about how they did come through that event strong. The Colorado t-shirt was one that was circulating after the Black Forest fires. And I wear that t-shirt sometimes to remind myself that I was a part of the collective community effort to do something about that. And then that image down below is something that I personally drew while I was in Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria, because sometimes there just weren't words, but that image became a memorialization of the strength of a rock, the sort of resilience of a buoy out at sea. And now I actually have a version of that image that I've had tattooed to sort of commemorate my experience while I was on that team. And more than anything, what memorials give us is support in making meaning that is not only held inside us, not just internalized. So it gives those memories a place to live, but also gives us a way to step away from those memories if they're still a little bit overwhelming or just so intensely emotional that we need that break. So sort of final slide, and I apologize for going a little bit over the 10 o'clock hour. I'm certainly happy to hang around and answer any questions that this has brought up for you. But I really invite you to think about how your team can reinforce those good recommendations and strategies that you come up with personally. So again, if people are already practicing this, then how do you make self-care and peer support part of team culture? Maybe you check in about it during these training meetings or other meetings of your VOSTs. Are there actually policies or structures that you can put in place that say, yes, we are going to do things like pre and post response check-ins? Or can we set limits on the number of hours worked per day or consecutive days worked, knowing that this communication work puts us in such close proximity to meaning making and to people-based reactions that it's going to be some of the hard work that's done. I don't know whether this exists for VOST, but another structure that sometimes helps other responders is to rotate high stress and low stress assignments. So not you're not constantly being put right on the front line in terms of the hardest hitting, most difficult things to deal with. And then more than anything, and I suspect that this team does this well, is to really celebrate and remind team members of the value of their efforts. It's actually taking time after a disaster to say, hey, we did good work. We're gonna, get together and enjoy each other's company, but not focus on something so heavy hitting, even a training, just actually spending some time chatting with one another, whatever it is. But just, again, reconnecting team members to what this team values and the good work that gets done. So that's what I can sort of share with you today. But this is my contact information. Please feel free to follow up with any additional questions or ideas you might have. I would love to sort of continue to support and resource this VOST teamwork mentality and structure, because you do really wonderful work for us during disasters. But I'll turn it over to you. What questions do you have?
All right, Aimee, thank you so much for coming on and joining us today and sharing your perspective on things with our team. Thought this was super valuable, and I'm sure we're all going to take a lot home from this, both for our team as well as each of our folks' agencies as well. So if anyone wants to follow up with Aimee directly, her contact information is there. Again, please log your time in the January meeting workbook. So check in and check out. And if you're viewing the recording afterwards, thank you so much for joining us here on the recorded version. If you're attending live, thanks so much for joining us today. And again, if you have any questions, Aimee can hang around for a little bit, but I do want to respect everyone's time, and we will see you April 19 at 9 a.m. Mountain Time to talk about verifying and authenticating social media content.
Well, I'll just throw in really, really quickly, because you do so much of your work virtually, you might not all that often get to see the faces or hear the voices of the people who are impacted by the collective work of the responses you take on. So just on their behalf, thank you for the work that you do, and again, thanks for inviting us to be a part of the conversation and the ongoing support to your teams. Look forward to connecting with some of you again in the future.
All right. Thanks so much, Aimee. Mickey, anything from you?
I don't have anything further other than we will stay in contact on Slack and hope to see everyone in April. This is a really important topic that Aimee shared with you today, and we want you to know that we really care about the impact as you are monitoring for us and helping make the state of Colorado respond and recover. So if you have any questions, please let me know, and I can work with Aimee to get additional information for you. Are we good for today, Kyle, do you think?
Yeah, I think that'll close us out. Thanks, everyone. Thank you,
All right.
Aimee.